Welcome to Will Talks. Today we have this amazing person who I personally have been following for over 20 years now in my journey as an educator. We have Menon with us from the Teacher Foundation. The Teacher Foundation, remember that. So Maya ma'am has been the founder director of this wonderful foundation, and I think perhaps one of the first training programs or development programs that I personally attended 20 years ago when I was starting out my school and when I was starting out on my journey of being an edupreneur, as they say today, was under the guidance and able leadership and compassionate time that I spent with Maya Menon. I'm so glad and happy that you've taken time out today to come and share all your views. There's so many experiences that you have across India, across, I don't know, thousands of schools maybe. You've probably met thousands of school owners, principals, you met teachers, you met parents, students, you've just met them all. And I really feel that, our time today is going to really endow and respect all those experiences that you've had, and I think we really need to hear more of that.
Thank you, Will, for inviting me.
So over the past, let's say, 20 years, in this amazing journey that you've had, in the very complex space of education, and more specifically in the space of school education, what have you seen working, let's say? What do you think works when it comes to education, learning? What are those experiences that you probably have? Maybe, it'll be nice to just do low fly or something like that, and then we could deep dive into more of what you say.
I think what works consistently in all kinds of situations, whether it's urban, rural, private school, government school, is teachers caring for their children. I think there is nothing more important than that. It's not about infrastructure. It's not about great curriculum. While all of that is important, it is about whether the teacher cares for his or her students. If the teacher ensures that the children in their class are learning, are well adjusted, are happy, are looking forward to coming to school, I think that is the single critical element that is an enduring element of school education.
I mean, coming from someone with 20 years of experience working with people, working with children, saying something like that is pure essence of the work, is what I feel. Yeah? Because if you look at what people think that schools need, there's a whole laundry list. They'll say ed tech, they'll say technology, devices, internet, all these inputs. But very few people talk about what you said, no? Care, connection. Because I think children yearn for that, right? And how do you get people to care for each other? Or
Exactly.
How do you get teachers to care for children and what they do?
You said 20 years. Actually, I've been in education for much longer than that. 20 years I've been working as part of the Teacher Foundation, of course. I've been 40 years in the business of schools and understanding schools. So it's like a generation or a little more than a generation So you've seen how schools have changed and evolved also. In the 80s, the schools are very different from the schools of the 20s. But however, having said that, the world has changed, technology has changed drastically, the way we connect with people has changed drastically. But I think when you talked about human connection, I think the human connection that a teacher and educator has with their student or students continues to be as relevant, as important as it was maybe in the turn of the 20th century as it is in the 2020s. So I think that continues to be important. And your question was about how do you...
how do we teach teachers to be more caring, or do we even need to teach them to be caring?
I don't think we need to teach them, because I think human beings are naturally wired to care for people. Mothers are wired to care for their children. Parents are wired to care for their children. I think what teachers yearn for, you were using the word yearn, what they yearn for is being seen as people in their own right, who have agency, who want to do something well in their profession. I often say no teacher goes into a school or into a classroom saying, I want to be a bad teacher. I don't care if my children hate me, but I'm just going to teach whichever way I want to. No teacher, every teacher, even in the worst of school, wants to be remembered in a positive light. But, of course, majority of our teachers do not get remembered for the good things they could have brought to the table as far as their teaching and learning is concerned. And that's because they themselves have never been heard. If you want teachers to listen to children, care for children, and therefore help children learn, school administrators, school managements, government departments of education have to be able to listen to teachers, have to consider them as important and really the key stakeholders of improving school education in our country.
Wow. So let's say I'm a school principal and I heard this from you today. And I want to go back to my school and I want to start listening to my teachers. How do I do that? What does that look like? Because if I can do that, and if my teachers feel valued and respected, and if they feel like they have a voice, you use the word agency, and I think that is something we need to kind of expand a little more, or deconstruct that word agency a little more. If I can get them to feel that way, as a school leader, I would then be enabling her to do what she woke up in the morning to do, which is to be a great teacher, right? What do you think I can do, or what do you think I should do more of in the school as a school principal?
You asked, how do you listen to teachers as a school administrator, as a school principal? At the Teacher Foundation, we talk about creating listening systems in the school, which means that the school administrators have to listen to teachers in the same way they want teachers to listen to children, which means that you need to have regular staff meetings, which most people have, most schools have. But it's usually a one-way talk where the school administrator or the principal says, this has to be done, who's going to be doing this, who's going to be doing this. Teachers are never asked for what are their opinions, what are their perspectives, what are their views about certain things, what are the challenges that they face. So it has to be a two-way street, this whole communicating with teachers, and that is listening. You listen to teachers, you listen to their problems. That is, and that can be done in a group situation. You can also have one-to-one listening, which means that the principal can say, I'm available if anybody wants to come and talk to me confidentially about something that's bothering them, something that's an idea they want to try out in their classroom. I'm available between this time and this time. Admittedly, school principals and leaders are busy people, but if you set aside a window on a weekly basis for teachers to come into you, to talk to you one-on-one, I think that's listening. And finally, you could have, typically many schools have it, suggestion boxes where people can anonymously give their opinions about things, because sometimes all teachers, because of the upbringing they themselves have gone through, they don't feel comfortable coming up and talking to the school leader. But at least there's another avenue through which you can listen to them, because they can write something and they can put it into the suggestion box, and once a week the leader or somebody, the secretary of the leader, can look at the things and then sift out what are the really key issues that are bothering or concerning teachers.
So what I'm hearing is, as a school leader, I also need to design and take into consideration and acknowledge power distance, because some of the teachers may not feel like coming up and talking straight away, right? And creating other methods for them to express.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Another thing that comes to my mind is when I'm listening to you, I am seeing what you mean by listening is certainly not compliance. You don't mean compliance. You don't mean obedience.
No.
You mean something far deeper and greater than that. You want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of what it means to listen, and listening may not be agree.
And this is actually it's a very complex question, and it's something we all of us have to work at it on this idea of listening lifelong. It's not something that we can ever say I have arrived and I'm a great listener. We all have to, because there are times when we have great listeners, and there are times on our off days when we are very irritable, and we tend to be off-putting to the people who we work with. So in terms of listening, I think one important thing and this is part of our Indian issue, Indians sociologically, how we are wired. And that is something we have to debunk in schools, because it has to begin with school. The whole idea of authority. Because we think that people in power, and a school leader is a person in power, he or she, just orders, talks down to people, and then they in turn talk down to people who they have power over. And that is that power structure is what actually affects our school education system. School, whether it's Department of Education officials or school principals, they talk down to teachers. They don't take them as equal stakeholders in the business of learning.
Almost like the lowest unit.
And then, so who does a teacher exercise power over? Children
Students.
who are even more vulnerable. So we have to debunk that. And I think the onus is on the people on top. In a private school, it'll be the school principal. In a government school, it would be the education department officials and so on. I think we have to get out of this idea that we have to exercise our authority in order to demonstrate our capacity and capability. Because if we get people on our side, we are far more powerful than if we just sort of talk down to people.
Wow.
I mean,
for a minute there, I just felt that, we are trying to teach children something, but children seem to be catching something else.
exactly.
They're seeing what we do. I'll give you an example. It happened in my own school.
Yeah.
A teacher was, let's say, sitting down. Let's say she was sitting down in a class and she was not paying it, she was not just putting 100% there in that class. And the minute I walked into that class, instantly she was up on her feet.
Because she was scared.
She was scared. She was up on her feet and she was
Yeah.
like trying to pretend. As, oh, come on, children, everybody open your books. No. In that moment, it occurred to me that was perhaps the most impactful lesson that class had that day. They probably saw that the teacher...
The teacher puts on an act.
And it brought...
Important, but not necessarily a useful lesson.
Yeah, but it brought tears to my eyes, because I called that teacher there and said, you did something to save yourself, but did we save an entire generation there? And that's why, it almost brings a tear to my eyes even when I think today, because I feel like there's so many things we are doing unknowingly, for these children, because as you said, our teachers don't feel powerful.
Exactly. It's important to hand over power to teachers.
We've robbed them of authority. We've robbed them of power.
Yeah. And yet we hold them accountable if
Yeah.
children are not learning.
It sounds unfair.
It is. It's been unfair for generations. And it's particularly in our country. Teachers in other parts of the world also feel often disempowered because of various systemic issues. But I think in India, it is particularly highlighted, this whole power structure in school education. You don't see it in other professions in the same way as you see it. Everybody thinks they know what's wrong with education and how to fix it. But they do not believe that the teacher can fix it if only we allow them, give them the agency to fix the problem. Which is why whenever you talk to schools, whether private or government, because we work with both schools, there isn't a big difference in how teachers feel about the systemic problems in our school education system. A lot of times they say these ideas, when we train teachers on more student-centered learning approaches, more active engagement in the classroom, and so on. They say all this works on, it doesn't work in our system. We have so many children in the class, but at no point would an organization like us, at the Teacher Foundation, ever suggest an idea which will not work in the average Indian school. Never. And yet, a lot of times, teachers disbelieve the veracity of these ideas, partly because they don't believe that they have the power to change it. And teachers say, no, it won't work in our school system. It doesn't work in the Indian education system. We have so much of our curriculum. We've got so much to do, so much else to do. I don't think in any other country do we talk so much about what is not going to be possible, rather than saying, what can we do?
I know, and I know what you're saying there, and I start feeling like for teachers, when you think about it, teaching is leadership.
Absolutely.
Teaching is leadership.
Absolutely.
Like a school with 30 classrooms is not one school, it's 30 schools. And
there's so much power in that.
So much power in that, right? Like that teacher can literally change the life trajectory of a child. And when that, what the irony of that is, they're sitting in a professional development workshop run by the Teacher Foundation, who knows what they're doing, who never say something that doesn't work, and sitting there, they've spent the money, they've put in the time, but they're there to debunk. They're there to say that this doesn't work. It's so funny, right?
I wouldn't say they're specifically there to debunk. I don't think they intend to debunk.
No.
I mean, there may be a tiny minority of it, but I wouldn't say, because I think I always tell teachers, and I do believe in it, I think I like working with teachers, and I've been working for so many decades with teachers because they're good people. I think all teachers who stay in the profession want to do something good and meaningful with their lives and with the children whom they teach. I think it comes from a far deeper place of not having a sense of control of their lives and the children they teach. That's what I've understood. In the early days when we were training teachers, I would say, we're going to come up with this wonderful workshop and the lovely ideas, and I'm sure the teachers will love it and they will be able to use it immediately in their classroom. And I realized that it doesn't happen. It's so difficult to unlearn bad habits that they've acquired through their own schooling. There's a lot of research which talks about teachers teach the way they have been taught.
Yeah.
And if teachers
That's their role model, no?
Yeah.
That's the model of the world.
If teachers have been taught in ways which are teaching to the test, very
to the
rote-based way, evoking fear in the class because that's the only way you can control the class. When all of this happens, it's very difficult right from when you're 3 or 4 or 5. The moment a child at preschool walks into a school or classroom, I think the predominant emotion they begin to experience between the adult and the child is one of a certain amount of fear. And if that is, you've imbibed that fear for 12, 14, 15 years, it's very difficult to shed all that in one workshop or 2 workshops, which is why it is very important to work with teachers on an ongoing basis.
And I think that's so critical that school owners and school leaders should realize that there is no one-off session.
It doesn't work.
There is no
It's
one-off
like there's no one-off exercise regime also. It doesn't help.
Correct. There is no. It's a commitment. It's a journey. It's not. You don't say return on investment. You got to say return on impact, right?
Sure.
You have to spread it, and you cannot say this is a tactical exercise. This is a strategic exercise. This is part of who you are as an institution.
Exactly.
You're a learning organization.
Absolutely.
And you need to be that way. So that's the kind of this thing.
Yeah.
And don't change your trainers again and again and again.
Exactly. It's not about, let me try this flavor and then the next flavor.
We're not like the 31 flavors of an ice cream.
Then you should do that with children. Nobody. a child and a teacher,
Yeah.
you need to build that relationship across a whole year, sometimes across 2 years, for children to benefit from that teacher's influence and teaching and so on. Similarly with a trainer.
And I'm seeing another thing in what you're saying. What comes to me is, if a teacher doesn't feel powerful, if she feels robbed of authority, and if she feels not very secure in what she's doing, and if she's just there to protect a job and a livelihood, although this is more of a vocation, and she's definitely paid, like underpaid.
Yes.
Let's face it, everywhere teachers are underpaid. And then she sees the school ads. Okay, and she reads the school mission and vision and philosophy, and she hears probably her principal talk great things, and she doesn't see that in action. She has no trust in what you're saying. She just says this is a sham. Now, have you then thought about your internal customers? Yeah.
Sorry, because it's a sham. There's also a case of the teachers also doing their own cover up. It's all a case of covering up. And I think that is where, especially something as fundamentally important as education, we can't be doing something other than working towards the ideal. We can't be saying that, okay, this is, we'll make do with something else and so on. We have to try and do the best we can. Sometimes people say that, oh, all this is sounding too idealistic. It doesn't work in our school. But the point is that education is one profession you have to be working from an idealistic point of view.
Yeah.
You can't be making compromises. Yes, there may be cases you may not reach 100%, but at least you're making that effort.
The purity, right? That purity has to be there. Absolutely. So let's talk about schools now. I mean, schools have to improve. There is no doubt.
All schools have to improve always.
Always, right? Improvement is not because you're bad. Or improvement.
Exactly, exactly.
It has to be the way of working.
Yeah.
Right? And when your students see the teacher improving, the teacher learning, that's when they also imbibe such characteristics, right? So what do you think, a school owner, because again, this whole school principal, when we look at a school principal, we say, oh, like parents look at a school principal and say she has full authority. But in the back of the mind, sometimes they feel she doesn't have authority because the management of the school is actually pulling all the strings. So if we move that a little bit, like in the US or the UK, in a developed country, there's so much principal workshops and principal. No one talks to school owners or school trustees or school managements, telling them, how do you create an environment where your school leader feels powerful, feels confident to then go and give power to, to this thing. So is there anything that you'd want to really say to school managements?
There are two things. One is, when you're talking about school managements and the people behind the principal, so to speak, who hold all the reins of power, we're talking about only the private school system. In the government school system, the people who hold the reins of power would be the Department of Education officials, maybe sometimes the education minister himself or herself, and so on. In all these cases, I think we have to take into account that school managements, but if you're looking at particularly private schools, the school managements, many of the members are not necessarily people from an education background. They may be builders, they may be politicians, they may be businessmen or women, and so on. And sometimes they're also philanthropists. But today, there are a range of people who are getting into school education. One, because they want to do something good, because there's nothing as pure in intent as setting up schools or setting up hospitals, I would think. But the other thing is also they realize that this is also a good way, I mean, even after COVID, to be able to be self-sustaining financially. So I think all of them, I think there must be a mandated thing that anybody wanting to set up schools must have a course, undergo a course in understanding what schools are and how schools need to be run,
how
and
children
so
learn.
on. How children learn, etc. That must be mandatory before the government gives an NOC.
Yeah, because so much of decision-making power is there.
Exactly.
And if they don't have the right buying considerations or they don't have the right data, then everything just kind of fizzles away.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And that really hurts because we know that it's not that difficult. I mean, everybody kind of knows what needs to be done. There's some fear that sort of kind of stops them from doing that. And I mean, even parents, for that matter, right? Parents have a big role to play. I think slowly and steadily, parents are feeling more like paying customers now.
I
You
think
think?
I think so, and also I think partly it's because of this whole the marketing culture, the corporate culture that's come into schools, and I'm not saying it in a critical or a negative way, but I'm
It's
just stating
different.
it as a
It's
reality
quite different, no?
that this whole corporate culture that's come into schools focuses on the medium and the message that's out there for the public rather than the substance. So they talk about form and function, and I think the form has overtaken the function. The function of the school is happy children learning well. That is the function of the school. But the form is the glitzy website, glitzy brochures, big hoardings, projecting yourself on social media. And I think as if the form mirrors the function, then that's good. But if
Wow.
the form, sort of
Overtakes,
overtakes the function,
overpowers.
then it's a disconnect and it's being hypocritical.
And to a certain extent, no, you start overcompensating on the form. Better designers, better engineers, better this, better that, better social hackers,
exactly.
better emotive this
Exactly.
thing. And you still
Fix what's happening in the school on a daily basis.
nearest to the child.
Yeah, that's
Nearest
it.
to the child. I think all our
That's
solutions.
sorry.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the simplest thing, and yet the simplest thing to say, but the hardest thing to achieve on a daily basis, day after day, week after week, month
Yeah.
after month, year after year,
Yeah.
and that is where sometimes schools, falter.
Over 20 years, tell me, what do you think is the average number of years that a principal will require to remain in that job, in a school, to start creating change and impact? What I mean is it like a year or 2 or 3 or 4? Because sometimes, these corporate culture is hire fire. Hire a principal and within a year you think, oh, you're not working, out. Right?
Exactly.
So what do you think should be
I
just
think,
a gut
I think
sort of?
any principal needs about 5 years to actually make an impact. It's like a politician has 5 years
Yeah.
to create an impact in their
Constituency, right?
constituency. Similarly, I think any school principal needs 5 years. You can't do it, especially because the school year is a very short year. You have about 7-8 months.
Yeah.
And to be able to, because there are holidays and exam periods and so
And
on.
attrition.
And attrition. So we need to give the principal or the school head 5 years.
5 years, right? And what do you think when you know that you're hiring somebody and you're going to give that person unconditional acceptance, to a certain extent for 5 years? What are the kind of considerations that school owners and trustees and management should have? Because most of the time I see them looking at 2-3 types of principles. I don't know if you feel that is true. One is the builder principle. What I mean by the builder principle is if she comes, admissions will come. If she comes, parents will come. She will, smile and mollycoddle the parents, right? But there is another principle who's the managing principle. He will make sure it's steady state. Everything will work the way it is. No change is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then there's the disruptor principle.
Sure.
So, is it like that? Do you think there are these kinds of principles? Do we need any of these kind of principles? Or
I'm not sure how many school managements actually think about what kind of principal they want, whether it is a builder or a disruptor or a manager principal. I'm not sure. I think they're looking for somebody who has a good
Within
CV.
their budget.
Within their budget, a lot of times, who has a great CV, who has worked in the right kind of schools previous to applying for the job of principalship. I think that's what they tend to look for. They're looking for sort of so-called reputation. The other things that I don't think in our country, we have actually developed people to take on leadership roles in schools in each of these areas. Yes, in some cases, you need people who will continue the school in a effective, efficient way. That's the manager principle. You do need school leaders who will come in to sort of like a new broom, sort of brushing out all the old stuff, removing the cobwebs, and recreating or transforming the school. So you need people who could be transformational, people who are entrepreneurial in their approach if the school is doing poorly and you need to enhance the finances of the school. The school principal needs to take responsibility for that. And so it's actually, I think we have to look at school leadership in a very far more complex way. It is leading learning in the school. And that's the single most important function. It is about managing so many things. It's managing staff, it is managing equipment and technology and resources like buses and all that. It is about ensuring parent engagement and communications and relations with parents. So we haven't differentiated school leadership in these different ways. We need to be doing that.
I think what you just said to me sounded like 5 jobs.
Exactly.
Because any startup, any company you go, there's a head of HR, there's a head of marketing, there's a head of sales, there's a head of this, there's a head of tech, there's a head of admin, there's a head of facilities, and now we kind of suddenly expect this school leader who, by the way, has no professional formal training in head teachership or school leadership. Now you want her to market also, sell also, customer service also,
transform learning
also. I mean, what kind of expectations we have on school principals today?
Which is why we have to have systems in place where we are able to support principals at one level. You need to support teachers at another level and I've seen it happening in other countries where a failing school, there's a principal who comes in and stays there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they really transform the entire school. They transform a failing school into a successful school, into a sought-after school, which does well in terms of learning achievement and outcomes, as well as in terms of reputation with the parent community. Children are happy and so on. You see that, but we don't see that enough in our country, unfortunately.
So I'm saying, what I'm hearing there is, parents seem to look at 10 standard results as the quality of a school. And to a certain extent, in other countries, I think they look at much more data sooner than a 10-year delay and a 10-year gap. Do you see that? Do you see this happening? And also parents actually, I don't know if you realize, but look at it this way. If I want to try 5 different mobile phone companies, I can do that over a 1-week period. I can say, oh, this network is working, this is not working, this internet is working.
You can't do that in a school.
How do you do that in a school? Right? If I want to try 5 different ice creams, 5 different coffees, it's easy to do.
Exactly.
Right? I get into a school with a great amount of difficulty, and then how do I try another school? How do I know what my kid is getting? Because I have one chance at it.
Yeah.
If I only go by marketing, I mean, think about that.
I think the couple of things, I think you raised a lot of things. One is about parents. I think it is up to schools to determine how they want to engage with parents. If you said parents are looking for basically results, 10 standard or 12 standard results, yes, possibly. But then it's about how are we, from the school side, how are we, molding that perception amongst parents. If parents are feeling that is most important, then obviously as a school, I've not done enough to actually change that perception. I need to have changed that perception that schooling is not just about grade 10 results and how many people got first division. Schooling is about, is the child adjusted? Is the child learning with meaning? Is the child looking forward to coming to school? Is the child reporting back to the parents what they are learning and so on? So I think we have to, from the school perspective, we have to mold the perspective of parents as far as education is concerned and what education is about. A lot of times teachers say, yes, all these methods that you train us on, but parents are looking for marks. But the point
and homework.
And homework. But the point is, who is engaging with the parents? It is the school teacher or the school themselves. We have to change. It's like if I go to a doctor and I say, I want this, I want this, I want this, the doctor's not going to listen to you or shouldn't listen to you. Yeah. The doctor will need to say, what do you need? What is exactly wrong with you? And therefore, what can I do to help you feel better and feel well and so on? That's the same rule that schools have to, go by.
Which means one key learning that I'm kind of, as I sit and listen to what you're saying, I think one of the key learnings for a school principal from what you're saying is that find better evidences and stories and narratives to share. Don't wait
Yes.
for your 10th standard results and then, treat everything like
Exactly.
that one student who got the first. What about the,
Exactly.
2000 others, right?
Exactly.
Find stories at every level. Find stories from every teacher. Find stories from every classroom.
Exactly.
And bring that front and center. Find stories that are going to shape your parents, because I think the greatest capital, the greatest social capital that a school has is actually the parents. The reason I'm saying that is because finally the parent is going to say what works and what doesn't work. There are schools during the COVID times where all parents ganged up and said, we are not going to pay you fees. There are examples here and there that I have heard that all parents went to school and said, we will pay full fees.
I've had cases of school principals
Correct.
telling me that. In fact, the school principal said, we are okay about reducing 25% and so on. And their parents actually said, no, we will pay in case there are other parents who are having difficulty, then you can make good of the money, the full fees that we're paying to offset the discounted fees that other parents are paying. And that comes from, as you very rightly said, where the trust that's built up between the school and the parent community.
Yeah.
Because I don't think parents, at least in urban India, and if they can manage to earn pay, they would stint on paying money. It's only this whole thing during COVID of parents,
It was a
constantly.
dipstick, right? It was a cultural dipstick.
Because they've been constantly they've been pushed into a corner, parents. And so now this was the time for them
Teachers
to
don't have
retaliate.
power. Parents don't have power. And then we expect.
So then they were exercising their power
Yeah.
because now the government was also on their side.
Yeah.
So,
So a lot of reflection from that, I think. Every school owner, every school principal needs
Yeah.
to reflect.
Yeah.
Really needs to reflect and say, hey, and now they can redesign. They can design with intention,
Exactly.
not by chance. And, organizations like the Teacher Foundation, really, people who've been there, done that, seen different, waves of change. You probably saw the computer wave.
Yeah,
then you saw
exactly.
EdTech wave. Then you saw smart classroom wave. And still development
And
is not
still the fundamentals are still not in place.
it's just
The
not happening,
fundamentals
right?
are still not in place.
So I think we just need to
and-
own up, acknowledge, and start working on things that really matter in that sense. So, is there anything you want to talk about in terms of this? Because this one thing that a lot of people do not know is the fact that you were one of the first people who brought in social emotional learning, SEL curriculums into India. I remember, I think you were the first person who introduced me to Circle Time.
Yes. Which has
Circle
been
Time.
created by Jenny Mosley,
And you
well-known
brought it
teacher
into
trainer
India.
from the
You
UK.
trained so many people, and I was part of that, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
So do you want to share anything about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yes, when the Teacher Foundation, right through the 20 years that we've been in existence, we have looked at social emotional learning, and I'll tell you why. Because when we were training teachers in good teaching methods, good assessment strategies, and so on, and we had the privilege, and I say privilege, to be able to go into the classrooms to observe the same teachers we had trained, because that's part of our model. We don't just train teachers and conduct workshops for teachers on different teaching strategies and pedagogies, etc. We also go into the classroom of each teacher one-on-one, observe them, then sit with the teacher after the class is over to give them feedback on what went well, what could have improved. And it's in a more conversational style. The idea is not to inspect the teacher. So while we were doing this,
the teacher.
we have to be respectful
Yeah.
of the teacher. And I always say it's a privilege because it's not easy for anybody to allow somebody to come into your workplace and watch you learn,
Yeah.
watch you teach, watch you do your work. It's like somebody almost like breathing down your neck. And therefore, we have to walk into the classroom with a sense of respect for the teacher and for the class he or she is conducting. So when we were observing teachers in our first year of, teaching observing teachers, we started noticing the teachers who were such wonderful participants in the workshops. They were warm, they were happy, cheerful people. They took on a completely different persona in the classroom. They became the stern, stiff person, and we kept on. Where's that teacher who we saw, who was so well engaged in the class? She'd become this authoritative, stern person. And after conversing with many such teachers, we realized that they were putting on this armor when they walk into the classroom, simply because they felt that that's the way they can keep check of children who could get on top of them. And that's when we realized that we have to be looking at how does a teacher stay the same warm person she can be in the classroom as outside the classroom. So, and because unless a teacher has positive interactions with children, the children are not going to respond positively to the teacher. And if the children don't respond positively to the teacher, the children will not respond positively to the subject he or she is teaching. So a caring, warm teacher just fosters love for the subject he or she is teaching. So that's how we got into social emotional learning. Then, of course, in 2012, we did a 5-year, which moved on to 7-year research on developing standards for social emotional learning, which can be seen, you can download it from our website.
Amazing. I was talking to a school leader in the UK, and I was talking about all the problems that I have. And he was like, wait, Willie, let me tell you something that you have that you don't know you have. Something that you have in India that you just take for granted completely. And let me cut to another story and tell you.
And which is?
I'll tell you. I'll come to that. My daughters, I'm always trying to be the teacher for my daughter. I'm trying to teach them, do this, do this, do this. This is how we do it. Observe me, listen to me, things like that. But they don't want a teacher in me.
Certainly not.
They want a dad, play with them, carry them on their shoulder and do funny things with them. And I'm like, no, I'm putting on that armor that you told me to put on. But then they go to school and in an instant, they look at that person in the classroom as a teacher and listen, and you know what? They learn from her.
Yeah.
And that's when it made sense to me. That British principal, that British head teacher was telling me, the number one thing that you get from students in a classroom in India is instant reverence, is instant authority, is instant compliance. You have that investment from a child inside your classroom, and you can really do a lot with that,
I would agree. This is something I always say, that whatever kind of school you go to,
the teacher may not need to put that armor, no?
You don't have to put on the armor, because I think Indian children, and I say that having gone to all kinds of different schools across the country, Indian children have the desire to learn, partly because I think even at the home front, even from the poorest homes, they send their children to school so that their child learns and does a better job of living a more decent, respectful life, respected life than their parents did. And I think kids want to learn. The kids are happy to learn. In a lot of cases, kids don't learn, partly because we haven't done enough. We as teachers, educators, the system, whatever you may want to call it.
We can just go on and on and on and talking about it, because I can see that you are such a passionate person. You've given up your life for this work. This is your life's body of work, right? And there's so many more years to go.
It's still scratching the surface in a sense. Unfortunately,
one of those
that's
wicked,
what it
complex
is.
problems, which require us to be completely, we just have to sign up our lives for this. So I'm really glad to having you here today. And is there somewhere where people can go and follow the contribution you're doing, the work you're doing in this space? Are you on Instagram?
I'm not on Instagram. I mean, I have an Instagram account, but I'm not really on Instagram. I don't really post on Instagram.
Facebook?
Yes, we have Facebook,
LinkedIn.
the Teacher Foundation Facebook, LinkedIn. Website is, of course, www.teacherfoundation.org. You can follow us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel.
And you're very
we have
happy.
Twitter.
You have Twitter. Awesome. And you're very happy meeting new principals, having random conversations with people, helping them, all that?
Yes, I'm very happy to do that. I'm
Thank you.
always happy to talk about education and teaching.
Amazing. It's because, most of the time people are just waiting for permission,
Yeah.
and when they know, and again, we're dealing with a set of teachers and principals who may not have agency. So your, very humble invitation to people to, so that they can come and connect with
Sure.
you, right?
Do
First,
reach out.
connecting, business or transaction, that's all later. But just, just meeting people, with this common goal, this common ambitions, common passion, I think that gives each and every one of us more encouragement. We suddenly realize that we are not alone.
Exactly.
You
I
know?
think that's the message we have to
That
say.
is the message we
That
have.
we are in it together.
We are in it together, and this too shall pass, right? Thank you, Maya Menon, for being with us today, and we really, really, really are so grateful that you were able to share all these wonderful thoughts that you've had from your own personal life experiences.
Thank you, Will, for inviting me. Bye.